You don't know what war looks like until it pulls into your driveway in a white SUV with a clipboard and a smile that costs less than decency. And by the time it leaves, there are orange steaks in your fields and a rumor in every feed store. That's how my fight began. I built this place with my own hands, hands that still bear splinters and scars. And one morning, a woman walked onto my porch as if she owned the map of my life. 20 years ago, I walked away from an architect's life in Denver because the city felt like breathing through a straw, and I wanted space, real space, night that was dark, and a sky that felt like it belonged to me. I bought 120 acres people called worthless, a collapsed barn, a choked well, a house that leaned like it had learned to survive. I fixed the bones set posts in frozen ground, wired panels into a stubborn solar array, dug trenches that smelled like cold earth, and started building a life that didn't fit inside a meeting agenda. By the time Mallory joined me, we had a working ranch, 2 kids who grew up with mud in their shoes, and 1,000 small fixes that taught patience. Every corral had a story, every acre a memory. And out here, the nearest neighbor was a retired park ranger who showed up for deer season and sometimes brought pie. There were no HOA signs, no committees measuring mailbox colors, just wind the creek and the slow rules of land that teach you more than any contract. Then one Thursday, a white SUV rolled up the gravel road, and a woman in a neat blazer stepped out with a clipboard and a practiced smile. "I'm Karen," she said, handing me a business card like it was an affidavit. "President of Echo Ridge HOA. Echo Ridge is 7 miles south," I told her. She didn't seem to care. She unlatched the gate without asking and walked onto my property like she'd taken a wrong turn into entitlement, and she placed a laminated sepia photograph on the hood of her truck as if it were a title deed. "Your land falls within the historic footprint of Echo Ridge," she announced as if a photograph could redraw a deed. "We are conducting a restitution initiative and verification of legacy claims." The picture had soft edges and the kind of nostalgia that sounds like truth, but the building in it had been gone long before I ever set foot on that dirt. I told her I purchased the place in 2004, that my deed and surveys were clean, and that the home standing there now sat on new footings. She tapped the photograph like it was a map and smiled like she was explaining multiplication. At first, it was paper and notice duct taped to the gate with legal-sounding phrases about possessory violation and community-enforced compliance. It had a seal that looked homemade and a signature from someone named as an interim registrar who did not appear in county records. 2 days later, neon stakes with pink ribbon began appearing along the southern fence line. Whispers started at the feed store, anonymous emails went to my children's schools, and a neighbor who used to trade barbed wire jokes for handshakes started avoiding eye contact. Paper had begun to work. Paper is a slow weapon. It scratches at reputation and eats ordinary days clean. But the theater escalated. At 1:38 a.m., my security camera pinged. Footage showed 4 people in HOA vests marching up my drive carrying a flag and pounding a metal pole into the ground 20 yards from the barn like they were planting some theatrical claim. A black SUV pulled into the driveway during daylight with men in tactical vests, one carrying a clipboard, another with a holster, and they handed me a folded interim enforcement order that read like legal fan fiction, bold claims, pseudo-official language, and enough confidence to make a clerk blink. "Sheriff Danner, the kind of man who's been around since my kids were small and knows when to act and when to advise, read the notices," and raised an eyebrow. "About as legit as a $3 bill," he said. He was right, but his hands were tied unless someone physically trespassed or unless clerks flagged the paperwork as forged. So while he warned and advised, the neon stakes stayed and the rumor mill chewed at the edges of our days. That's when I called Nina Turner, a lawyer who looks like she was built for trouble and efficiency. I dumped a folder on her desk, the taped notice, the security footage, the forged parcel, identifiers, the emails sent to my kids' schools. She didn't blink. "We dig," she said, "and then we file." Nina called in Albert Roth, an archivist who prefers dusty rooms to headlines, and he started pulling maps, probate files, federal project reports, and anything with dust on it. What Albert found changed the shape of the fight. The parcel Karen claimed the so-called Drake place in her evidence matched a tract that had been submerged by a federal reservoir project in 1958, 5 miles south of my land and underwater for decades. There was a notarized renunciation from 1982 where the last Drake heir surrendered any remaining claims and transferred rights to the state. The registrar named on the taped notice did not exist in county records. The signature matched a cousin of Karen's, who had a history of pretending to be something he was not. It wasn't sloppy, it was manufactured. Then Evan Marsh walked into a diner with a manila folder and a conscience heavy enough to matter. He had been on the HOA board and resigned when the group started pushing these tactics. Inside his folder were minutes emails and an internal memo titled Phase 2 Claim Enforcement Strategy, drafted notice templates, proposed zoning overlays, even a budget line for acquisition incentives. "You were the test case," he said. "That sentence lands like a brick. If they could take my place with theatrics and forged documents, they would try it elsewhere." We stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding and made it a legal battle. Nina's filings were surgical. Albert's maps were precise and merciless to fantasy. We submitted sworn statements from former HOA members who said they'd been bullied and lied to, produced the nighttime footage of men planting flags, and laid out the notarized renunciation and project maps. Courthouse mornings are odd. The tile echoes your boots and people look smaller in there, but facts breathe easier under fluorescent light. Judge Callahan did not tolerate theater. She wanted facts, and we gave them facts. Karen's counsel tried to appeal to sentiment, oral history matters, and the judge cut through that with a look sharp enough to stop a speech. "This is a court of law," she said. "Folklore has its place, but not when it's used as a tool for fraud." The ruling was decisive. The court found the HOA's claims were unsupported by law and bolstered by forged documentation. It ordered the dissolution of Echo Ridge HOA for systematic governance violations. It issued a permanent injunction barring their representatives from my property, and it referred criminal charges to the district attorney. And then came an image I did not expect to savor Karen, who had shown up on my porch in a white pantsuit and clipped shoes like she expected to be obeyed, standing motionless as deputies closed handcuffs. She did not argue. She did not cry. She simply stared at the floor like someone whose story had finally been returned to sender. Victory did not look like fireworks. It felt like a morning where the light over the pasture did not carry the metallic taste of fear. I rebuilt the south fence, not because it was necessary, but because it felt like stitching a wound closed. Driving new post into clean earth was a private ritual, a way of naming the ground mine again. We kept the burned survey stakes in a pile out back. Sometimes I thought of making a coat rack out of them, a little joke about how someone thought a photocopy could steal a life. The aftermath was not spotless. Rumors leave residue. A few neighbors were slow to extend a handshake, and the feed store's gossip took a week to die down. But more people reached out, neighbors with similar horror stories about rogue committees, homeowners threatened with fines based on imaginary codes, folks who had paid to go away. We hosted a fall market on the ranch vendors, a neighbor's bluegrass band, burgers on the grill's string lights, and hung a hand-cut steel sign at the gate that read, "My land, my legacy, not your history." People took pictures and laughed, and for one night there was a small, honest celebration. If there is a lesson here, it is blunt. Documents, attention, and the willingness to push back make truth matter. Heritage is powerful and protecting. It is honorable. But when heritage is wielded without honesty, it becomes a cudgel. The law does not move on its own. It needs people who notice, who gather evidence, who are willing to risk reputation, to pull at the loose thread until the whole thing unravels. Vigilance is not paranoia. It is a civic muscle. Sometimes you need a lawyer who will turn over rocks, an archivist who will read old plats, and a former insider willing to speak. So tell me, where would you draw the line between protecting heritage and abusing history, and how far would you go to defend what is yours? Share your story below. Tell us what you learned the hard way, and if paperwork ever pushed you into a fight you did not ask for, say how you stood your ground. We read every comment.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.